So for those of you that don't know us, we are MELD, Men's Emotional Leadership Development. And it's our mission to serve men all over the world. And to put it in short, we help men drop out of their heads and come into their body. The foundation of our work is in somatic work, and also we use a lot of the polyvagal theory in our work to help men feel more, because we know that our bodies store emotions, store trauma, and it's in our physiology where lasting change happens. And so we are on a mission to help as many men as possible to downregulate, to come into their bodies and to feel, so that they can take better action in their lives and become better fathers, husbands, friends, community members. And so it is my great honor to introduce to all of you Dr. Stephen Porges and his son, Seth Porges. Little clap. This is a huge honor. I've been studying the polyvagal theory for a few years now, and as a coach, it's certainly helped and supported my work with my clients, but it's also supported me as a man as I navigate my own relationships in my life. And so I'm excited to dig in here. So I'm gonna give some introductions here. Actually, first, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping stuff here. So questions, we're going to save some questions for the end. Reserve your questions until the very end to our Q&A section here on our call. What's important to us is that you stay connected and embodied through this experience. And so limiting these moments where we start to ask questions and starting to come into feeling. And who knows, maybe the question you have might be answered in the next hour or so. Okay, so if those questions aren't answered by the end of this call, put them in the chat box and Duncan will navigate and he'll facilitate that at the end. We would love for you to have your camera on, but also not necessary. The focus is going to be on me, Owen, Seth, and Dr. Stephen Porges. And so it's not necessary for you, but I mean, part of this work is co-regulation, and it's nice to see faces here. Nice to see people in this space with bright faces and engagement. And so if that's available to you, I highly recommend coming on camera, but also no pressure to do so. All right, let's take another deep breath. All right, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Stephen Porges. I'm going to give you a little bio here. So Dr. Stephen Porges is a distinguished university scientist at Indiana University, where he is the founding director of the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium. In 1994, he proposed the Polyvagal Theory, a theory that links the evolution of the mammalian autonomic nervous system to social behavior and emphasizes the importance of physiological state in the expression of behavioral problems and psychiatric disorders. The theory is leading to innovative treatments based on insights into the mechanisms mediating symptoms observed in several behavioral, psychiatric, and physical disorders. Welcome, Dr. Stephen Porges. And of course, it is also my honor to introduce Seth Porges. Seth is the co-author of Our Polyvagal World, How Safety and Trauma Change Us, which he wrote with his father, a journalist and filmmaker, self-produced, directed, and originated highly acclaimed films, How to Rob a Bank on Netflix and Class Action Park on HBO Max. Seth was previously the technology editor at Popular Mechanics magazine, a columnist for Bloomberg Business Week, and has appeared in roughly 50 episodes of Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum. Welcome, Seth. Thank you for being here. And it is my honor to introduce my mentor, Owen. Owen started this work really as a way to develop his own emotional intelligence. And what started off as an experiment and as a way to be more embodied, he now sits as one of the leaders in the men's wellness space. Author of Grow Up, A Man's Guide to Masculine Emotional Intelligence, 9 Steps to Releasing the Remarkable Man Within You. He's a TEDx alum and has been featured in the New York Times, Men's Health, and ABC News Live. Owen is now the co-founder of MELD, Men's Emotional Leadership Development. Welcome, Owen. My name is Mike Sagoon. I'm the co-founder of MELD. I am a men's coach and training to be an SEP, Somatic Experiencing Practitioner, and I'm today's moderator. So welcome, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. It's so good to see wonderful faces. And now let's take another deep breath. I'm really mostly doing that for myself because I need to settle here. So it's really nice to be here. And I'm also noticing the activation. So I want to first start off with a really general question for those of us that aren't really familiar with the polyvagal theory. And I want to actually start with you, Dr. Porges. And I want to play around here a little bit because, Dr. Porges, I want you to give us your most academic definition of what the polyvagal theory is for those of us that need some academia here. And then, Seth, I'm going to bring it to you, and I'm going to ask you to explain the polyvagal theory in a way that half of us can understand what it is. So, Dr. Porges, take it away.
Well, I'm going to probably usurp Seth's comments because if I were to talk about the science, that's all I would talk about, and that would be our whole hour. And no one would ask questions and no one would understand anything. So to make it really simple, and then I'll give it to Seth, who has he can find words to communicate these concepts very well. We, in the culture that we all have emerged from or grew up in, no one talked about your physiological state. They talked about your intentionality, your behavior. They didn't ask you about your feelings. When they did, it was kind of suppress those feelings. But what polyvagal theory is about, it's about acknowledging that your physiological state affects how you engage the world. And Seth will elaborate on that because he basically used several pages of the book to describe it. And I don't want to take his words out of his mouth. But the point is, as men, we're always taught to literally suck it up, be brave, be an adult, or, not to express the inner feelings. So we've turned off this at great expense. And I think the expense is what I would like to elaborate after Seth puts it into English.
Is that the baton being handed? Okay.
Yeah, I'm handing it. Yeah, the generational baton. Yeah.
There it is. Okay. That's the polyvagal theory in a strict academic, anatomical, from a strict academic or anatomical perspective, is a model for how the human nervous system, and through the human nervous system, our entire body and our brain and everything in between, responds and changes with the world around us, in particular with how safe we feel. And if you're going to summarize what polyvagal really is, throwing away all the clinical stuff, all the academic stuff, it can really be boiled down to one sentence. And that is how safe we feel, not how safe we are, but how safe we feel is critical to our physical and mental health and happiness. And it transforms just about every single aspect about how we experience the world, how our bodily systems, how our ability to heal, grow, and restore, and how our ability to socialize operates. And if we want to break it down to simple, logical terms, our autonomic nervous system, autonomic meaning automatic, it controls basically everything in our body we don't consciously control, which is the vast majority of bodily systems. Our heart beats without us thinking about it. Our sweats without us thinking about it. All these things happen without us thinking about it. But our body still needs to determine how our heart should beat, how much sweat we need, how much this is. And so there's this kind of under the hood invisible algorithm, if you will, that determines how every little bodily function operates. And it breaks it down to very basic states. Now, there's some complexity to this. There's some mixing and matching. But if we're going to use very simple terms, there's very simple autonomic. We can also say physiological. You might even say emotional states that dictate how our body operates. And in the strictest sense, we either feel threatened or we feel safe. And when we feel threatened, immediate survival is the primary and kind of only priority. And so our body is putting all of its resources, and this is like metabolic, caloric resources, which at one time in our evolution were scarce, towards immediate survival because that's all that matters. But when you feel safe, your body can disengage those threat systems. And instead of putting those resources towards escaping, fleeing, freezing, all these other things, it can put it towards long-term health growth and restoration, as well as sociability, as well as the advanced cranial functions that are required for learning, for critical thinking, for independent thinking, as well as a shift in our sensory experience. And so our body can only heal, grow, and restore properly when we feel safe. And when we feel safe, our sensory experience shifts. Now, you think about this, a lot of our senses have to have more than one function depending on how safe we feel. Our auditory system, as an example, if I feel safe, its primary job is to be involved with communication, with diplomacy, with sociability, with conversation. It's tuned in to the sounds of human speech. When you feel threatened, your auditory system is a threat detection machine designed to pick up predators and things. So the actual sounds you hear shift. Now just about every sense, everything in our body shifts between safety and threat, safety and threat. And only when we feel safe can we properly heal, grow, restore, feel like ourselves, feel the best version of ourselves, and a sensory level experience the world as we like to experience it, and all these other good things that make life wonderful. Now, the problem we all experience today is we live in a world that is absolutely inundating us with signals and signs of threats. So our threat system was a system that was designed for short-term activation for immediate survival. Now we live in a world in which it's, for many of us, being triggered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's what creates a lot of the problems. I'm going to stop ranting now because we can go on forever like this. Yeah. So that's what the polyvagal theory is.
Would you like me to comment on that a little bit more? Okay, so
Yes.
moving back to what Mike asked. So the polyvagal theory is based on the autonomic nervous system. So that's part of the science. The autonomic nervous system, as Seth elaborated on, really kind of regulates your bodily organs, but it does more than that. It adjusts, and that's what Seth is saying. Our autonomic nervous system adjusts to the challenges in the world. And in polyvagal theory, we have the concept of signaling, in which the nervous system is making decisions, not intentional, but more on a reflexive level, and that's called neuroception. And so we're wired, in a sense, with a way of detecting features of safety, features of threat, and features of life threat, which are really profound to the nervous system. And as we get triggered to signals of safety, we're calmer, we're engaging, we're more flexible, we're playful. Our voices are melodic. We get triggered into a mobilization state of threat. Our fight-flight system, our skeletal motor system goes on board. And if we're talking to men online, men who basically get upset, let's say they have to do a presentation or they get criticized and their body goes like that, and they won't be able to process the information that's actually being articulated. It could be even a family argument. They won't be able to process it. The body will be in a state of mobilization, fight, flight. However, and this may happen in situations of humiliation, which occurs in the workplace, it occurs socially, where it's so overwhelming, you just want to disappear, you want to shut down. And that recruits a very ancient component of the autonomic nervous system, a very primitive one that's shared with virtually all vertebrates, and that's called the dorsal vagal system. So now we have to flip back and we talk about the vagus as this massive cranial nerve that comes from the brainstem and goes to all or virtually all our organs inside our body. And basically, it's part of a bidirectional superhighway. And what we want to emphasize is that there is a feedback loop, meaning our bodily feelings get transmitted to our brain, and the brain uses those feelings. But now we want to talk about the history of men and feelings. And the history of men and feelings is you don't have any. And what that means is you turn off your feedback loops. You don't respect them. You don't listen to them, except the rage one. The rage one, you say, I got to get out there and I got to really, express myself. But the other ones, the vulnerability ones, the playful ones even get suppressed. And so the system starts to learn about being suppressed, and we call that numbness. So the interesting question you can always ask is whether people can describe their internal feelings. And what happens, of course, in the world that we're in, people don't, that's not a priority. And so as they are turning off those feelings, they're turning off the feedback loops. And guess what happens? They start getting psychosomatic illnesses. The gut stops working right. The heart stops working right. They go to physicians look at the end organ. They say, hey, your stomach is fine. Your bowels move fine. What are you complaining about? And the issue is what they're complaining about is that the nervous system has restructured how their body reacts. And that precedes end organ damage. So you start getting this gut problems long before you have any, quote, pathophysiology. So it doesn't fit the normal assessment scales. So the issue is we evolved as a social mammal, and with social mammals, let's talk about what happened to the vagus, which is the name of the theory. The vagus has two faces. It basically comes from two different parts of the brainstem. It may look like one
Polyvagal,
nerve.
more than one. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
It may look like a nerve, but think of it more as a conduit with many, many wires in it. And those wires are going to different organs. And most of the wires are not going from the brain to the organ. They're going from the organ to the brain. So close to 80% of the vagus is bringing sensory information that informs the brain about the status of your organs. And in the world that we're dealing with, especially I would say within this group that you've created, I would say one of the major shared experiences is turning off the feedback loop, turning off bodily feelings. I'm going to make one other generalized statement, and that is Seth was articulating about feeling safe. And when we use terms like feeling safe, we tell people you should feel safe. We think of feelings as having a degree of intentionality. But we're going to reframe that and say feelings are your body sending signals from the visceral organs up to your brain, and your brain is recognizing it. And when the body is serving to support your health needs, meaning homeostatic functions, which mean health, growth, and restoration, and even sociality, when it's doing that, you have the capacity to feel safe. But once you disrupt that homeostatic function and you start getting
We'll wait a couple of seconds here to see. if
Oh
it's
yeah,
back
he's
on.
frozen there. Like I can just pick up what he's saying there. So there he is. So
Go
you're
ahead,
frozen
Seth.
for a second. Okay. No, you're frozen for a second. Continue.
Oh, I was frozen.
Yeah.
Universal vagal shutdown.
Yeah.
It does happen.
It's immersive.
Okay.
Here, I'll pick it up here. Yeah. So before we kind of pass back to Mother here, I think it's important to quickly sort of talk about what the vagus is, because that's so key to, it's in the name, polyvagal. And I think we've all heard of the vagus and maybe even seen things on social media talking about it as this kind of magic trick, quick fix hack to make you feel calm or make you feel whatever. And what the vagus is it's a cranial nerve, meaning it's a nerve that originates in your brainstem, goes down to your gut, and in doing so, it connects virtually every bodily system and every organ to each other. And this is what allows our autonomic nervous system and our entire body to act as a system. So that when our heart beats one way, our lungs don't act another, our spleen doesn't act another, our sweat doesn't act another. When we feel activated, our entire body becomes activated. When we feel calm, our entire body feels calm. The vagus is the nerve that makes that connection, that conduit possible. But the vagus is also something that is drawn a lot of attention, as I mentioned, social media, because activating it, triggering it, calms us. It's part of the calming parasympathetic nervous system. And there's been a lot of attention paid on social media to these tricks, maybe splash cold water in your face, do whatever. And I'm sure these are fine, these are good. But what polyvagal theory really emphasizes is that the best, most effective, most natural, most everything way of activating the vagus for the purposes of feeling safe, for feeling calm, for feeling whatever, is social interaction itself. The polyvagal theory links the development of sociality in mammals, such as humans, to our ability as humans to heal, grow, and restore, right? And when you start removing vagal triggers or triggering the vagus from how the vagus is actually intended to be triggered, it's like you're getting the skim milk version of it. It's not the same, right? But social interaction, in particular, face-to-face social interaction, because through 99.99% of human evolution, that's all there was, and that's all our nervous system really recognizes, despite the existence of phone, internet, Zoom, whatever, is the trigger to our vagus that we are safe, we are calm, we can shut down our defenses, and we can heal ourselves. And so the polyvagal theory really, really, really emphasizes co-regulation. Social co-regulation is a term we're going to use. And this is how not only are we being calm because we're around other people, we are calming them as well. It's bidirectional co-regulation. So when you're with somebody who makes you feel safe, your body shifts its autonomic state into a state of safety. We are really, really good at reading the autonomic states of the people we are in close proximity to. This makes sense because our bodies are constantly trying to determine how safe can I feel. And a good clue to that is how safe does the person next to me feel. So when we feel safe, we make other people feel safe. Those feelings bounce back and forth. The term I use, it's an autonomic echo chamber, right? And so bidirectional co-regulation, being in close social proximity, particularly with things like hugs, physical touch, cuddling, all these things are an important part of this puzzle here. This is the biggest, most important, most magical way of healing our bodies. Of course, we live in a world now in which many of the things that once required face-to-face social interaction being done online, on Zoom, over the phone, in any sort of other way. And so we, in strictly speaking, don't need to be around other people. But when we don't sort of give deference to our ancient compulsion and biological needs, our bodies don't heal. You know, we need to, we live in a world that is in many ways alien to the one we evolved into, but we need to look at the one we evolved into and the requirements our bodies have baked into it in order to understand how to keep our bodies calm, safe, and healthy.
Wow. I mean, go ahead, Dr.
I
Stephen
was
Porges.
just going to emphasize one other point that's going to be really, I think, resonate with your group, and that is the issue of symmetry in the co-regulation model. That we think of sociality as just spending time with people. And we think, but really the underlying point of co-regulation is that there's reciprocal interaction and there's a great degree of symmetry in the relationship. That the underlying feature of sociality is the ability to trust and be trusted. And that has been the cornerstone of humanity. I also want to bring up, because we all lived through the impact of the pandemic. And the pandemic was, to me, such a challenge to my nervous system, because under threat, what's the first go-to place, as Seth said, when we're under threat? Who do we go to? We go to people. And what happened during the pandemic? People, even relatives and friends, became a threat. And I still think that we're still haven't gotten over that, because we never acknowledged the profound impact of the pandemic on retuning our autonomic nervous system and making us less available to feel less available or accessible to others, meaning, are we able to trust other people? I think we became much more cautious in our social behaviors.
Yeah, and I also want to quickly, I'm sorry, please go on.
Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also, you know, it's one thing to say social interaction is involved with triggering bodily feelings of safety, et cetera, et cetera. We can honestly, in an anatomical perspective, just spell out how and why this works. And it's actually pretty simple. So the vagus nerve has two branches to it. That's where we get the term polyvagal. You have the ventral vagus and you have the dorsal vagus. The ventral vagus is only present, as is in humans, in modern social mammals, humans, dogs, wolves, you know, whatever. Reptiles don't have it. The dorsal vagus is way more ancient, as my father said, goes back to the absolute earliest vertebrates. They both result in kind of shutdown behaviors. The dorsal vagus is a shutdown into a state of freeze. The ventral vagus is a shutdown your defenses for sociability, calm, peace, healing. The dorsal vagus plugs into the brainstem, the ventral vagus, which is the modern vagus, plugs into the brainstem in an area we call the VVC, or ventral vagal complex. The ventral vagal complex, where the ventral vagus plugs into the brainstem, is the exact same place in the brainstem that 4 other cranial nerves plug into. There are 12 cranial nerves total. So that's a third of your cranial nerves, in addition to the vagus plug into the spot. Those cranial nerves are trigeminal nerve, the facial nerve, the accessory nerve, and the glossopharyngeal nerve. Those are the cranial nerves that are responsible for facial motion, shoulder shrugging, larynx, pharynx movements, basically every single bit of physicality that's involved with expressive social behavior. These nerves, and thusly these muscles, are only activated when we feel safe by the ventral vagus. So it is physically, we are not fully capable of socializing with our full, emotive, expressive selves. Go on, yeah, Dad?
Okay, I do want to clarify.
Please clarify.
They're used, okay, so your facial muscles and your vocalizations occur even under threat. The issue is the features of them change. And what we forget is the power of intonation, the way we talk. So you'll, especially in social interactions, there are people that you will meet that you just will feel uncomfortable with, and you can't identify why you don't like them. You may like what they're
Yeah.
saying in terms of their political views or other biases, but you just don't feel safe with them. They create a cringe reaction. Now, I want you to
Yeah.
think back.
Sorry. I'm sorry. There's a delay.
Okay, think back at how a mother calms her baby. She uses a prosodic intonation of voice. And I like to say mothers calm babies and fathers calm their pets, meaning that they will use a pet-oriented or infantile type vocalizations to their pets, but they may not with their children. But that intonation that they're talking to the pet or the mother's talking to the baby changes the physiology of the pet and the baby. It's really remarkable. It's wired into our nervous system that these intonations are signals of safety to the physiology, and that enables the platform of social interaction and trust to emerge.
And this is
Yeah.
incredibly important because we are constantly broadcasting our autonomic state to people around us through our facial expressions, through our vocal intonations, through everything. So if we don't feel safe ourselves, if we're constantly stressed at work, if we're having interpersonal problems, and we're around people, their bodies are going to read that. And again, we live in an autonomic echo chamber. They're going to take on those feelings as well. So I think a lot of people, a lot of men in particular, cope with living incredibly stressed out existences. And then when they want to be around the people who make them feel calm, they're not finding that because they're then projecting these feelings onto them. And they're why are you calming me down? Why are you not making me feel better? When they are also projecting these feelings of threat out into the world as well. This is another problem that many therapists face. It's very difficult to be there for patients if you yourself are dealing with stress. If you yourself are dealing with, we embody the feelings of those around us and we project them out. And just understanding that and knowing that, I think, is really, really important so we can be aware of what we're bringing to the table when we interact with other people and the effect we might be having on them when we might have expectations about how they make us feel as well.
Yeah. I love that. This is beautiful, guys. Like really, really wonderful for our audience. This is really helpful. Our autonomic nervous system essentially detects danger and safety, right? And I really love this one. It's like that's all.
Let me clarify that point. It reacts to danger and safety. The detection of it is much higher in the cortex, but it triggers a physiological adaptation. So it does the detection is complex nervous system. What you are feeling is how it gets really impacted on the autonomics. So that if you're under danger, you want to have the metabolic resource to deal with the danger. And if it's safe, you want to shift your resources. It's adaptive, it's flexible. And this becomes this whole issue in how we treat our bodies. We don't tend to have a great understanding of the states that we need to be in to be, let's say, caring, engaging, helpful, compassionate. We think these are instrumental behaviors that we can control, that we have agency over it. And I always just want to pose one simple, battle. And the battle is between the brainstem survival or foundational survival mechanisms and our really elaborate, complex cortex that can come up with very interesting narratives that can explain anything, whether it's real or not. So the part is, who's going to win the battle? The battle's always won by the brainstem, the survival one, and then the cortex, higher brain structures, takes that and makes a narrative of it. It makes you the good guy, even though you may have been really outrageous and exploded at people verbally or behaviorally, because the narrative will say, well, they deserved it. This is what they had done to you. So you create these storylines, with great, passion to shift or get meaning into a behavior which is really quite simple. Your body went into a state of threat, and this is the program it has. Now, the interjection, or let's say the therapeutic interjection, is to basically have curiosity and say, wow, my physiology shifted. Let me take a moment and let me kind of feel that. There's no, and then I'll start to think, well, there's no reason. So maybe I need to attend and treat my body, or at least move my body out of that physical environment to allow it to regulate.
And that's where like perception meets neuroception.
Yeah,
right?
well, the one that let's move slightly, or a special type of perception. That's where interoception meets
Yes.
polyvagal theory, or meets neuroception. Neuroception is the reflex that has that physiological response. Interoception is the perception of internal bodily state changes. And so, if we go through a life where we are literally indoctrinated to be numb, not to, in a sense, attend or respond to bodily feelings. What's our skill set when it comes to interoception? What's our ability to perceive those bodily changes and even to acknowledge them? So
Yeah, I mean,
in
it's
that
very low,
case,
right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, and
you,
it's like most of our audience, right? The guys that we work with often come to us because their somatic awareness, their somatic intelligence is they've never been trained to do any kind of work like this. They've been trained to be up in their head. They've been trained to be analytical. They've been trained to um, problem solve. And we create these groups,
mhm.
these what I would say peer-to-peer groups, where guys can one be in whatever state they are in, and then be held by other men and practice co-regulation. So I want to quickly actually go to Owen really quick. And Owen, how do you see us in the work that we do use polyvagal theory to help men develop to become better men, to feel more, to um, you know, just feel better?
Um, well, just as a minute of a backstory, I mean, I got into this 50 years ago when I became a rolfer, and that's where I first met Stephen Porges, and or at least heard of you. And also, 50 years of healing my Asperger's. So I was sort of the consummate guy that was disconnected and frozen. So I really, experientially understood everything you guys are saying because that was me. And I have this sense of appreciation and compassion for the men that we work with because, as you all have said so articulately, that we come into this experience from a culture that has trained us culturally and let alone with stress and trauma to shut down, to freeze, to disassociate. And our work is, my work's always been in the work that we've been doing for, 30 years since I sort of shifted the model from men's work towards this model is, as you're saying, getting guys connected to their bodies. Because I realized many years ago as a rolfer, if you ask a guy, what do you feel, as in what do you feel emotionally, they would look for the closest door out of the room. Where what I saw was if you ask them, what do you feel in your body? They wouldn't leave. Maybe they wouldn't know what they felt, but they'd entertain the question. And with a few more probing questions, they'd start to feel their body. And once they started to feel their body, almost innately, they'd start to feel their emotions. Or you were able to ask, okay, what do you feel emotionally? And one of the things I saw was happening was one, I created a mental frame that was safe for them. But more importantly, and this is what we're doing in our work, we create a safe space. And I think that I love that you guys are really emphasizing that because it's our experience that nothing happens without that safe space. And as men, we go into a space and we innately believe or respond as if it's not safe. And so in our groups or our trainings, we initially deal with that in some very effective ways. How do we create a safe space so these men, including ourselves, can downregulate so that we can co-regulate, so we can connect. And as you're saying, so we can actually have fun and start to interact and start to be men like we were when we were kids, when we could play with each other as peers. And so we create these safe environments where I think in many ways the men are healing themselves more than we're doing anything. We create the context, we maybe give them a little skills, we sort of hold this safe space, but in the process of being in this safe space, they start to train themselves on how to co-regulate. They retrain their nervous systems on how to first have this proprioception of an interoception of what's happening for me, and then this ability to be able to communicate it to other men and not be shamed, but actually honored for their vulnerability, which is a huge shift. I mean, one of the things that often happens in our trainings is we have maybe 60 guys in a training. We ask the first guy, we do a check-in and they're all checking in, and one brave guy says something that's vulnerable. And then he's surprised, and everyone's surprised. In this context, he's not shamed, he's actually honored.
So Owen, I would basically, if this is what I've come to believe, that there's only one gift that we have, and that's the gift of accessibility to other, because it's the gift that gives back. It's very interesting, that, of course, as a male, are we told that we should be accessible to others? From the get-go, we're basically taught that if we show intensity and focus, we'll be respected, which means we're blocking our vulnerability and accessibility. And it's been an interesting journey for me through an academic world, which is not, I would say, the most welcoming or supportive or calming. It's very hierarchical. It's very aggressive to, quote, have survived that and still come out and still seeing what it's given me in terms of leveraging ideas and being a good scientist, but also seeing the pain that it's inflicted on those who bought into it. And I think before we went on, we were talking about people who appear to be successful, who feel that they have not accomplished anything in life, because the accomplishments are really based on that accessibility, the linkages that we feel connected with others. And without that feeling of connectedness or trust, life doesn't have the value that it could have. I also want to mention that you brought up something else that was very important. That was playfulness, because now you're changing reciprocity into playfulness, and that pulls in the social engagement system. So play becomes this wonderful neural exercise in which we have our social system on, but we're moving. And now we're not in rage. And what you will or may have known, that some people play well and some don't. And those that don't play well basically lose their face and they lose their voice in the game. So they're no longer aware of the other. And so people get hurt or they get hit, and those people then get marginalized from the play. Actually, if you watch the playground behavior of children, you learn a lot about nervous systems. And if you watch the playing behavior of kittens and puppies, you learn the same thing. Face-to-face interaction and the retraction for them of claws and not breaking skin with their bites. So they do all the same behaviors, but they don't injure each other, and they're respectful of each other. And again, we have this kind of worldview that it's really, it's interpreted as, I would say, a misunderstanding of Darwin. It's like saying the strong survive, but it's the survival is really based on cooperation. And actually, when I write about evolution, I really kind of like do this twist in saying the most successful are those species that have cooperated, in a sense, evolved to cooperate. And this is not what's taught to us. And I'm going to go back to the academics. The academic, you go meet. So whenever you change institutions, they start telling you what you need to do. And what they tend to tell you is you need to do your own work. If you collaborate too much, or if you give your students too much, you won't make it. So it's a world that really is putting rules out that are taking away from, I would say, what our species really loves to do.
Yeah,
but
and talking about, I'm sorry, Dad, that you're done.
Go ahead.
Okay, so going back to what I was saying about play, I think that's something that really can't be emphasized enough as well. Again, looking at it in very kind of primitive forms, dogs in a dog park, children at a playground, anybody playing a game of basketball, you are both engaging the ventral vagus, the social nervous system. You are feeling safe. You're not feeling threatened, but you also are mobilized. And again, mobilization is typically associated with threat, with defense, with fight or flight. What play does is it engages both of these systems simultaneously within a state of safety. And what that allows us to do, as he called it, a neural exercise. And I think that's a really wonderful and apt and important term, because what it allows us to do, what it's exercising, is our ability to shift between states of safety and states of threat without getting stuck in the state of threat. So what play exercises is our nervous system's ability to engage the mobilization, to engage our threat and defense systems without getting stuck there. Now, again, our threat and defense systems, there's nothing innately wrong with them. They have served us for many, many millions of years very well to keep us as a species alive. The problem many of us have is when they're constantly engaged or we feel stuck in them. What play does is exercises our ability to use them and then lose them. And that's really, really, really important. And I think going back to sort of the narratives about how many of us were raised, play when I was growing up was viewed as frivolous often. Recess was being cut at school. We were told we were learning in school in ways that were very solo, staring at a textbook or listen to a lecture oriented, rather than community or social or group driven. And I think in doing so, a lot of us have felt that the muscle that neural exercise is exercising becomes stagnant. And I think it'd be very difficult and overwhelming for people as adults to suddenly try to re-engage it. But it's a very, very important thing to do because, again, it allows us to navigate the world, deal with the inevitable onslaught of signals of threat without being overwhelmed or stressed by them. Play is very important.
It's an interesting point because Seth, what you're talking about is there's almost like this blended state of ventral vagal and sympathetic, right? And I'm curious, are there other blended states? Can ventral be blended with dorsal vagal, and what does that look like?
Yes.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way. I hope that when you're in the arms of another trusted or loved one, that you have a blended state. Let me wish that on you. Which is that your social engagement system is on and you're not mobile, so you're immobilized without fear. And what you start, actually, you see babies and mothers, it's easier to talk about them because you can actually see the bodies conforming to each other. And that's really showing you that the skeletal motor system is just relaxing itself. In a sense, when we feel safe enough to be in that state of shared moments of intimacy, we give up the skeletal motor defense system so our muscles relax.
Yeah, you can mix and match almost. I'm sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it's like, I'm sitting on bed with my husband and we're watching Netflix and we are relaxed and we're connected and we're coming into this dorsal place, so this dorsal vagal.
Yeah,
we're preparing for bed. Yeah.
The important point here is the dorsal vagus is not merely a defense system. It's part of a health, growth, and restoration system as well. So in its native form, not being recruited in defense, it supports digestion, it supports cardiovascular function. So the contractility kind of relaxes, we don't pound, our breathing slows up. Not only does it slow up, it becomes more shallow, which is kind of paradoxical. We're breathing slowly and shallowly because our body says, I don't need that much oxygen. And our gut goes into its normal rhythmicities, which are always interfered with by sympathetic activation and mobilization in states of threat.
And so one of the questions that comes up for me is that, as men, we got the cultural phenomena, and we also have sort of the biological phenomena of aggression. And
so I have this discussion. My wife is Sue Carter, who's known for discovering the link between oxytocin and social behavior. But she also has very strong views about women and sex differences in physiology and behavior. And I always ask this basic question, is it sex differences on a genetic neurobiological level, or is it a retuning of the nervous system as a function of the culture? So, and this is an important question. So even though there are biological markers, it doesn't make it permanent. So what you're saying is the aggression. I'm not so sure males are more aggressive than females. Especially if you spend time in academics, you would agree with me.
Well, what we see is once these men have a safe place, their aggressive nature, which is I agree, I think a lot of it's cultural, starts to turn into what you all are saying becomes play.
Yeah. It's interesting. Academics can actually be a playful area of criticism without hostility. And that's fun, where you start in a sense seeing weaknesses in studies and try to refine them because the goal is a shared goal of doing something better, and we're not feeling that we're being attacked. So it's all how you frame it and in a sense the intonation of your language when you're being critical. So are you being critical and exuberant, So we want to bring in the notion of the sympathetic nervous system as also having this positive aspect of exuberance and energy, only if the social engagement system is, in a sense, constraining it. Or I use the
You know,
term choreographing the rest of the autonomic nervous system. So when we talk about blended, what are we blending with the sympathetics in the ventral vagus? Play, dance. What are we blending with the dorsal vagus? We're moments of intimacy and just feeling safe in the arms of another.
Seth, were you going to follow up with that?
yeah, no, I think, you kind of opened up, I think, a really interesting line of questioning and thinking that I think polyvagal theory is very profound. It offers one of the more profound, I think, revelations of it, which is sort of just this big question about, like, what is the state of human or man? Like, are we aggressive? Are we social? Are we whatever? And I think it gives a very, very simple answer. And I think to understand it, just look at dogs. It all comes down to dogs. Dogs share a lot when it comes to the humans and our nervous system and how we respond outside of the biases of culture, right? And language. Like, just in this basic state, dogs are very similar to us, only they don't watch the news, right? And they don't go to work. So they exist without that. And dogs, if you have a dog that has been beaten down by the world, it will growl at you, it will bite you, it will be aggressive. If you have a dog who is coddled and treated well, it will kiss you, it will smile at you, it will play with you. We as humans are basically the same. Many of the things that we call aggression, that we call anger, all these things are a response to feelings of threat. And I think that's really, really important to understand, because it allows us to feel, I think, empathy for people, to understand why behaviors that we don't like or we feel threatened by exist in the first place, and understand that they come from that other person perhaps being inundated with feelings of threat, and understanding that that dog is not born growling, it's not born biting, it got that way because somebody beat it or it was in an abusive household, and had it been treated differently, it might have turned out like that golden retriever who's kissing everybody. And that's the same with us as humans.
So my comment on that is that polyvagal theory is an optimistic perspective, because it
Yes.
says that even the features that we may not like are really the manifestations of being locked in a physiological state that supports defensive behaviors. And so that means that interventions are not talk therapy. Interventions are more targeted to changing the physiology, more somatic oriented.
I'd love to transition a little bit into how the polyvagal theory can impact relationships and parenthood. And so we've been talking a lot about co-regulation here. And the way that I understand co-regulation is really, if we didn't have adults in our lives or caretakers in our lives that really taught us how to regulate or co-regulate with us, we then learned how to soothe ourselves, which would then turn into sometimes unhealthy coping mechanisms or management strategies that we have. If we are in a relationship with someone and we're noticing that we're constantly getting into conflict, and we want to start to regulate ourselves in the relationship so we can have constructive conversations, how would you guys talk about that, and what would you guys recommend?
Well, the first part of all this is the awareness of one's own physiological state, and to understand that you're not, if you're in a state of threat or, let's say, anticipation of threat, you're cautious, you're in an environment, you feel like you're stepping on eggshells or whatever metaphor you want to use. It's not a physiological state that's going to have flexibility. We want physiological states that are playful and have flexibility. The part that you brought up, which was we are trained to, and I think the information of understanding that our behavior and our reaction to others is in many ways determined by the physiological state that we are in. Once we have an understanding of that, we can start experimenting with strategies of moving our physiological state around. And this is like you were doing that before we went on by taking the breathing. The slow exhalations were a reasonable way of getting that ventral vagus on board. I think there are other ways, including now I'm developing a variety of listening therapies that are really sending signals to the brainstem that everything is safe. And what does that do to the bodily? Do you shift bodily states? And it's quite remarkable. If you know the signature of what your body wants, you can give it those melodic changes. So just like the mother calming the baby, is there a rhythm that your body would listen to in terms of modulation of sound that your skeletal motor system would just say, I don't need to be defensive. I'm now calm. And what would that do to your digestive patterns? The metaphor I use are two of them. The one I love, like, is I'm on a raft floating in the ocean without any chance of falling off. So already there's no anticipation, but I'm just now floating with rhythmic rocking. But I can also visualize a baby in a rocker. And you start immediately, when you visualize that, you start getting a little bit of a smile, and you like that experience because the body likes those movements, because those rhythmic movements are similar in periodicity to the vascular movements in our body and our digestive movements. So we are basically at home with certain movements. And when we do that, our body knows what it means. It's just like the intonation of the voice of a mother rocking back and forth at certain rhythms tells us the same thing. I'm safe in this space.
Seth, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting and complex question about like how can we use polyvagal theory to deal with relationship problems of all sorts. And I think a lot of it comes down to, I think we as people oftentimes, and men especially, oftentimes expect other people to make us feel better without understanding how we're making that person feel in the process. And I think it's really important to understand how subtle social cues and behaviors impact other people's nervous systems, and understand that when we make other people feel safe, they will make us feel safe and make us feel better as well. And a lot of this stuff is really simple. We're talking a lot about vocal intonations. We're talking a lot about the word prosody, which is melodic, kind of sing-songy intonations. And again, let's look at dogs. You talk to a dog and you call that dog a good boy. You can either say, who's a good boy? And the tail will wag. Or you can say, who's a good boy? And the tail will not wag. It might be scared. It might growl. Understanding the way we subtly influence the nervous systems of the people around us and the people we're close to, with vocal intonation, with facial expression, with the baggage we're bringing from a stress day at work and unloading onto them. Those are really important because we can't expect other people to make us feel better if we're making them feel worse at the same time. Because co-regulation is about making people both feel better. It's not about unloading. It's about projecting safety and getting safety back, not projecting all your baggage and then expecting somebody else to make you feel better. That's not co-regulation.
There's another part of that. I call this biological rudeness. And that is, you engage someone and that person turns their head and walks away from you, or turns their head, looks at their cell phone, and then comes back with a narrative. I had to do that, without the true apology is, I'm really sorry I disrupted, you were engaging. So people in their visceral, when that engagement is violated, there's a trigger. And then the narrative comes, I'm not important, you don't care about me, and all these other things. The issue is the culture that we're in. There's so much of that going on, people picking up their cell phones without acknowledging that they asked the other person a question, and the other person is attending it and engaging them, and now they pick up their phone. And they're not understanding that that violation of expectancy to the nervous system is a signal of threat. So much of our social behavior is now covered or clouded with threat signals because we say, well, you can still hear what I'm saying. What does it matter? It matters a lot. Our bodies are interpreting these cues, and we're not taught about that.
And not only we're not taught about it, we live in a world in which many social interactions have been offloaded through technology and through other things. And so we simply might be out of practice. Social people aren't born with social anxiety. Maybe some are, but they get it if they've been isolated from COVID for a long time, right? Like, social interaction itself is a muscle that needs to be exercised. And when we no longer rely on it for all of our social, needs, we can use technology and other things, we might fall out of practice. We might kind of forget how to make people feel safe through social interaction. And it's important to kind of find excuses to go out there and be social. It's like something that we really, really, really can't neglect as people.
It's incredible what happens. And Jerry, if you're still here, my husband, I don't think I'm saying anything that's confidential here, but it's amazing that when he and I are practicing this work with each other in conflict, the moment that one of us starts to soften our eyes and unclench our jaw and release our shoulders and let our gut stick out and just relax the tension in our body, the tone of the conversation automatically shifts. And so my offer to our audience members is when we are in these kind of like, ooh, this is a tense moment, that try softening the body and see what happens in response with the person that you are in conflict with. Oh, and would you like to add anything before we move on into some questions from
Yeah,
our
you
audience?
pretty much sort of said what I was going to say is that we aren't taught how to downregulate or how to, as we might say, how to connect to ourselves. Because what I learned is, and this is just sort of to rephrase what you guys are saying, my ability to connect to myself is going to be reflected in how well I connect to others and how well they connect to me. So a lot of the work that we're doing with men initially is training them how to have a connection to their physiological experience. Just in my experience, just the act of feeling my body, as Mike said, my stomach relaxing, or maybe first feeling my stomach's tense, my jaw's tense, hearing my voice, feeling the stress response, just being able to feel that tells me that I'm safe. Because part of not feeling safe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we stop feeling. We stop feeling our physiological and our emotional experience. So even if I'm willing to just feel the discomfort of my physiology and my emotions, I'm taking that first step towards safety. So can you all comment on that?
Yeah, I'll just say that the first step is awareness, and that's really what you're describing. And the next step is what I call the journey to embodiment or self-embodiment, and that's what you're describing as well. I think that's where all therapies need to start.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think, yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to take some questions from our audience, and Duncan has queued me up here. So this is from Bob, who asks, what are your thoughts on prayer or meditation to self-regulate, not just co-regulating through social interaction?
I actually did a podcast. It's on the YouTube with David Bercelli, who's the creator of TRE, but he was a priest before he became a trauma therapist. And we did a segment on spirituality and polyvagal theory. And the issue was whether or not from my perspective, polyvagal theory, if the issue is not meditation, but gets into the notion, or prayer, but gets into the notion of types or categories of spirituality. If we see spirituality as being connected with all, or everyone, and humans as well, I would say it's very polyvagal. It's co-regulatory, interactive. But if we treat spirituality as dissociative, which many people do that, then it starts taking us away from people and makes us and our own feelings. And so there is this complicated aspect of what we're doing and what we're labeling it as, whether we're labeling it as a theological strategy, a spiritual strategy, a formalized religious strategy, or what we're doing. If we say that our goal is really to be connected, and that's really, in a sense, in a way, our spiritual goal, and we can be connected with other, and we can be connected with a divine, that's a very polyvagal type of concept.
Yeah, in addition to that, one of the features of many but not all prayer traditions is chanting and vocalization. And that, in simple terms, is a vagal trigger. There's a reason when I was growing up, my dad, some of the earliest CDs, compact discs, I remember him having were like those Gregorian chant CDs, that were popular in the 90s. But chant and vocalization and singing, these are all vagal triggers that are also elements of many, many prayer traditions. Meditation, breath work is a huge hallmark of almost every form of meditation, of course. And that breath work, particularly the slow exhalation, is a vagal trigger and a way of allowing us to calm down and enter a parasympathetic state. And so I think, and this is a lot, this is purely speculatory, but one of the things I find very interesting about spiritual traditions and about many religious traditions is how they have perhaps embedded into them many, let's just say, ancient secrets of the nervous system that have been sticky and been transferred over many, many generations from pre-literate and pre-scientific times to the present day, because certain things about this work on the nervous system level, and they come in different names and different terminologies and different vocabularies across different regions of the world and different religious traditions, but there's a lot of commonalities in them, and those commonalities tend to appear with things that have been shown to impact the nervous system in some sort of calming or activating way.
There's also, Seth, posture. Virtually all the
Yes,
religions use posture, and that
yes.
triggers bioreceptors. And so there, I see that many forms of prayer, well, even okay, the first one, if we talk about prayer and exhalation of voice, whether it's chants or ohms or whatever, that's very vagal. The other one is posture, because that triggers and becomes neural exercise. And many religions have very similar postures and breath, which becomes, even the metaphor of terms like exaltation, inspiration, all these terms have deeper meaning in our culture, and they're linked to physiological reactions.
And I would add to all that the whole phenomenon of movement.
Mm-hmm.
And you got, some religions have dance, and some traditions have dance or movement, and how movement, particularly with a group, facilitates co-regulation.
Yeah, and the rhythms of the movement, which is really my latest thing that I'm focusing on, is that these rhythms are not random rhythms. They're rhythms that our nervous system is familiar with.
And just the role
Right.
of many of these traditions in creating opportunities for social interaction, I don't think can be overstated as well.
And we
Yeah.
all know that we're losing churches in this culture and a lot of other places for people to come together and connect.
Hmm. Well, it's come together, connect, and to trust. Which means, let's translate it back to where we started, to feel safe.
Great. So I want to end with this question here. And this is from our membership. This is Jacob from our membership. He asks, what are the next directions the research is moving toward?
Well, I can tell you where I'm moving towards.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so no, I've been I call this the fourth act of a very interesting career. It's, not the final curtain, but pretty damn close to it. And it's the culmination of all the information and insights I've had is really all about signaling the nervous system to heal. That's really to be accessible, to engage, to be connected, to heal, and to heal not just mentally, but also to heal physically. And what it's all about is signaling the nervous system to give up its defenses. And we talked briefly about prosodic voices, but I've gone and gotten deeper and created algorithms on how music needs to be composed to really literally talk to the organs. And we have actually prototyped this. It's actually going to be coming out soon. It's going to be fun. And so talking about like Asperger or talking about being on spectrum. So the issue, I see that there are multiple levels in which acoustic rhythmicity can be useful. One, of course, is calming and regulating, enabling sleep and down-regulating from defensiveness. But the other one is mobilizing with an integrated organization. So getting out of bed and being organized, going to school for kids on spectrum, that where they have enough control over their body to feel in their body. And we actually we're creating a suite that has 3 different segments. One is calming, one is getting out of bed, or I want to get up, it's a great morning, with kind of a sense of, feeling about flowers blooming. And then I want to be curious. I want to move on. I want to move. So it's not movement with threat or anger or aggression. It's movement with curiosity. And these rhythms are embedded in the music.
Yeah, about that music too. It's really, so my father had already developed a product out there called SSP, or Safe and Sound Protocol, which is currently delivered by, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 practitioners around the country as an audio-based therapy to help with, all sorts of things, in particular auditory processing issues, but it just tends to make our nervous system feel safe, which creates a lot of opportunities for healing with all sorts of conditions from anxiety on up and down in every direction. This next thing he's talking about, which is coming out pretty soon, is basically taking, as he says, sort of the embedded auditory signals of safety that have been devised into newly composed music. And he's working with this amazing composer and producer to produce this music as a way of basically you play music that just tells your nervous system it's safe. And he demonstrated this recently at a trauma conference in Boston. And this is not a joke. We're at a conference room with a couple hundred people, and within minutes of him putting it on in a non-ideal setting, it's supposed to be with headphones, you're playing it in a conference room, half the conference room was laying down spontaneously in the aisles, passing out. And I have photos
Not
of this.
passing
It's
out,
one of the
not
weirdest things I've
passing
ever
out.
seen. Taking a nap, whatever it was. It's something you guys should absolutely kind of keep your eyes out for when it's available. I think, just the ability to
So,
play music that is scientifically engineered to make you feel calm, basically.
so let me give you one example. And this was not in the Boston meeting, Seth. This was in Potsdam. We just came back from.
Yeah.
I got an email from a person who was in that meeting. She's an occupational therapist, and she had had a hysterectomy a few months ago. And so she's listening to music, and she feels these rhythms going through her body, and they go into the void where the uterus was. And she has this feeling that they're, in a sense, the rhythms are looking around, and she has this sense of, oh, everything's okay there, and this really sense of integration of her own medical experience from listening to the music. This was not unusual. People were describing like where they had abdominal surgery and the rhythms would come and stop and then jump over. And I got an email just recently about someone who had abdominal surgery, and after the music, the actual scar tissue started to, in a sense, the inflammation around it started to disappear. So it's kind of like telling the body to welcome what is there. So you're safe enough to welcome. Now, remember, we live in this world and we are fearful of medical intervention because medicine it's a manipulation. It's done to us because something needs to be done and we're in threat. What if we approach medicine on a welcoming level, that we might need some help, but we are now collaborating and welcoming with great accessibility what the physicians are doing. And that's a strategy. We're developing this music for anesthesia. So before people go into anesthesia, they're listen for 15 minutes and their bodies will be more welcoming and they won't fight the anesthesia. But it's this whole, remember I said, if there's one gift we can give, it's our own accessibility. But if we understand the algorithm that triggers our own accessibility, it becomes scalable to make the world better.
That's all very exciting. One more question before we close out here. Gabrielle asks, in context of co-regulation, what can happen if human interaction has been the source of threat?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, but I think we all know what that is. It means that the human interactions now have associations. Those memories are top down. So the top down signals are triggering our physiology to be in preparation of being injured. And so it's part of a psychoeducation to understand that it's through the learning or the association. Now we need to have, let's say, a somatic-oriented therapeutic one where people can become more aware of their physiology and say, look, I know that I'm going to be triggered by the social interaction, but can I do a little breathing? Can I titrate this? And actually you're telling me, Mike, that you are a SE provider, right? Or training in that. And that's, they would call it pendulation, and I would call it titration. But the idea is that you sample a little, your body gets to learn that it's not going to be disruptive, and then it can be expanded. So we are, in the case of what that question, the person is in preparation that social interaction will be harmful. And so if aspects of social interaction can be titrated, then the person's nervous system starts to learn that it's not going to be hurtful.
Yeah,
It's
I
also
highly
important to understand.
recommend.
Yeah.
Go
It's
ahead.
not, if social interaction makes you feel threatened, you can't assume always that it's your, it's just your response to it. Perhaps that interaction itself is threatening. And I think, differentiating between safe and unsafe social interaction is key to that. And it's a titrating the safe social interaction and avoiding the unsafe social interaction, I think is also key to that too.
Awesome. Let's all take a deep breath. Dr. Porges, Seth, how can our audience stay connected to you all?
For me, they can check the Polyvagal Institute website or send messages there.
Yeah, I'm on social media at Seth Porges, and Dr. Porges and I wrote a book that came out several months ago called Our Polyvagal World, which is really designed to take polyvagal theory, which is very big and very complex, and make it understandable and relatable and shareable. So, check it out.
And Owen, how can people stay connected with us at MELD?
Probably the best way is through our website, which is MELD, MELD .community, and it's .community spelled out. And I want to thank the two of you for taking time from your busy day and your busy schedule to share your, not just your wisdom, but really your work and your care for people. And Dr. Porges, I've been your fan for now decades, and when I first got exposed to you through John Cunningham, the Rolfer, when you and did the study, I sort of got it, but it wasn't until many years ago I started reading your books that I really realized that what I was doing, and certainly what we're doing with MELD, is solely based on your work. It was like seeded maybe unconsciously, and now it's very deliberate. And so I want to thank you for making this work what it is, and just say that literally the work that we've done with men have saved men's lives. Men have come to us and said, if we weren't in this work, I would have killed myself.
Oh, that's
So
wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you very much for those wonderful words. I will just make one final statement about Rolfing. So Rolfing, actually John, who you brought up, John actually Rolfed me, and it was an interesting relationship. Basically, he Rolfed me, and I taught him physiology. So we used to have Saturday sessions, and then we go out for coffee. It was an in-kind sharing, and we became very good friends for years when we were in Champaign-Urbana with him.
Well, and thank you again for being the director of research for a year for the Rolf Institute, and and all you've given to the Rolfing community, and really now to the whole planet. So it's been a great honor to have you here.
Well, thank you. But and you understand the engagement into the Rolfing community came through Peter Levine, so you have to understand that link. And that was my introduction into somatic therapies. And so it's not like I just gave something. I learned a lot. And it was really, I would say I learned a lot in a great playful environment.
Yeah, and these Rolfers have always been really open for first to Peter's work. And I remember in 1980 when I heard Peter speak about his work at a Rolfing conference, chills ran through my body because I finally understood what I was missing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that really was a setup for the rest of my life. So the two of you, we had Peter on a few months ago, have really set us up to create what we've created for men.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to see Peter next month in Switzerland, and we're going to spend, actually, we're doing a conference together, which is really, it's always great to see him.
Cool. All right, y'all. Thank you, Seth, Dr. Porges. Thank you for your time. For those of you out there, stay connected with us on MELD.community, and please have a wonderful day. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Porges and Seth. This was a wonderful conversation.
And stay connected.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
And be accessible.
Thank you.
Right, yeah.
But not too accessible. Just remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all who joined us. Thank you. Have a really wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.